After a 2-month break, the FIM Sidecar World Championship returns for its first two-day event of the 2019 campaign. We head to the Pannoniaring, just 70 kilometres east of the Austrian border, for the annual Hungarian combination of sprint race and gold race. The opening round of the 2019 campaign took the outfits to legendary Le Mans for a race that turned out to be a classic. Reigning world champions Ben and Tom Birchall led the field from pole, but their significant qualifying advantage was soon undone by a frantic first lap in which Pannoniaring and Veravainen came through from fourth to become surprise leaders. Swiftly collecting their composure after an early collision with Ben and Tom Birchall, Reeves and Wilkes made a superb move to recover second place, moving past the struggling Stroyer and Russo and the Birchall Racing Yamaha in one move. But the number 77 was unable to maintain that pace and dropped back to third, struggling to fend off Schlosser and Fries for a podium place. Once in front of old rival Reeves and into clear air from second, the Birchall Racing Yamaha set about cutting the margin to the flying Finns up front, but it was the Brits who ended up somewhat worse for wear after this latest duel. A turn 5 crash with Pannoniaring on the final lap meant the number 16 could only limp home. A 10-second gap to the chasing pack, insufficient for them to hold second. Reeves and Wilkes inheriting the place, and the closely pursuing Schlosser and Fries claiming a podium position on their comeback ride. First victory since Hungary 2018 for Pannoniaring and Veravainen. The number 44 outfit switched to Yamaha, working a treat in what turned into a race of attrition up front. Ben and Tom Birchall concede 12 points in the opening race of the campaign, and importantly 7 to their main 2018 challengers Reeves and Wilkes. Pannoniaring and Veravainen claim the early advantage. Avon are the sole manufacturers of tyres for the FIM Sidecar World Championship, and yet variations in tyres and their usage are a critical part of finding success on track. We caught up with 3 world champions to discover the role of sidecar tyres and how they differ from other bikes.
There's some different sizes. There's mainly for the front and side they're 13-inch, which is pretty basic and everyone will use the same. For the rears, there's 13s and 14s, and it's really down to personal preference, what works best for you and your sidecar and your passenger.
There are a lot of things that determine which tyre compounds we choose, mostly down to weight, the weight of the riders and the bike, and of course the track temperature. It's all down to each team's strategy.
We discuss it as a team and we try to simulate some race runs or some different times on the track to see whether we want to go a bit softer or whether we can manage with a harder one or what's best.
Avon provides 3 different compounds of each tyre, plus wet weather options not likely to be used during this scorching European summer. But once the selection is made, how do the teams manage their tyre life?
The tyre alone is not the point when you will good and fast drive. The sidecar passenger must look with the head, what is the speed, and then the body when go on the fairing, left and side. And then beginning is the grip from the new tyre is perfect. And then the passenger must look what is the bike. Maybe the front is not correct, then go a little bit in the front or go a little bit in back.
The gold race and sprint race are really different. In a sprint race, you're more or less full gas all the way through. But in the gold race, we use strategy, holding back on some laps to preserve the tyre.
Then the driver will drive many years, give the idea, all the learning, the young driver. And this is the compound, this is the rubber, then the pumper. This is many parts where you must complete for a good setup for the bike.
A large number of fans soaked up a real festival of racing at the Pannoniaring, with the second round of the 2019 Sidecar World Championship sharing a platform with the Alpe Adria Cup. The regular sidecar fixture at the Pannoniaring has become a firm favourite since its debut on the calendar in 2015, particularly with former world champion Tim Reeves, who's won here on no less than 4 occasions. Hungarian round threw up a far closer qualifying session than the season opener in Le Mans, but it was the same men who made it into the lead two positions. Ben and Tom Birchall taking pole from Reeves and Wilkes. On this occasion, though, just over 0.3 of a second separated the two outfits. Preventing an exact repeat of the front row from the season opener 2 months ago, Schlosser and Fries could only qualify down in 6th, with Päivärinta and Verovainen instead making their first top 3 start of 2019. Meanwhile in the pits, problems following a practice engine failure for Remsen Weschelberger meant the number 55 outfit failed to make the start, leaving only the other 12 qualifiers to contest the race. Just 0.7 of a second separated 4 outfits from 4th to 7th in qualifying. Stroyer and Russo surprisingly off the pace down in 7th, and Wissen and Hoffer on the number 41 3 seconds further back down in 9th, their worst grid position since the 2018 Hungarian round. Slow starts from both of the second row outfits created mid-pack bunching in the run down to the first turn. Schlosser and Fries best placed to take advantage as they swept around the outside and into 4th. Sattler and Neubert ended up as far back down as 8th before at least snatching 6th. Stroyer and Russo following them down the inside to recover 7th place from Witten and Hoffer. Meanwhile, further back, a strong start from Archer and Thomas from 11th on the grid was undone as they ran wide and off the track altogether, dropping to a last position from which they never recovered. Back at the front, the 3 front row outfits had moved forward together and began to break away from the fights behind them, including a duel for 5th between Sam and Adam Christie and the recovering Sattler and Neubert. Stroyer and Russo could only watch on as the number 35 Kawasaki, fighting back from a slow start that had dropped them 4 places off the line, reclaimed 5th position with a smooth inside pass. With an unencumbered racing line though, Dutchman Stroyer, 2015 world champion, was able to get on terms with the 2 outfits directly ahead of him and incorporate himself into a 3-outfit fight, albeit outside the podium places. Having dropped back slightly in the opening sector of the lap, Reeves and Wilkes hunted race leaders Ben and Tom Birchall down, pulling back 0.4 of a second and tagging themselves onto the tail of the race leaders on the start-finish straight. Now within touching distance, they had their first real opportunity to strike, diving down the inside into turn 1 and making a relatively straightforward pass. Ben and Tom Birchall, though, stayed on their tails and never looked far away from making an overtake of their own to recover the lead. In fact, the Birchall brothers set their personal best time on the second lap, proving that they hadn't given up on victory in 2019's first sprint race just yet. With Sam and Adam Christie defending 6th place successfully against Stroyer and Rousseau, attentions returned to the unresolved battle for 8th position. Wissen and Hoffer had surprisingly struggled throughout the weekend in Hungary after a 5th place finish in Le Mans, and they began to come under pressure from L'Église and Clément. The French duo were somewhat fortunate to inherit 8th without much ado, when Wissen and Hoffer made a frustrating lap 6 error, but the number 41 regained its speed quickly and was soon back within touching distance of their original race position. Gaining 1.5 seconds in 2 laps, the Swiss duo were ready to pounce, taking advantage of their top speed and slipstream advantage to move smoothly through into turn 1 and back to 8th once again. Ben and Tom Birchall, meanwhile, had a tougher time picking off Reeves and Wilkes, 2 outfits looking for their first victory of 29, and as 2 great rivals, neither was willing to yield. Tim Reeves put in a robust defensive top spot, the duos even touching through turn 15 as the race went to a last lap decider. But it was Ben and Tom Birchall who had bolted at the right moment with tyre life and paced the match in the closing stages, and although they left it late, they were relatively comfortable after an incisive turn 5 move. Le Mans winners Päivärinta and Verovainen had kept pace but could make no impression from 3 seconds back, so the Birchall brothers became the second race victors of 2019. each of the three leading outfits taking points from the other in the opening two races of the campaign. Benetton Birchall fourth in France, winning in Hungary. The stage was set perfectly for a close battle in the gold race for championship leading supremacy. Behind the podium places, Schlosser and Fries completed an isolated race in fourth position with 8 seconds in front of them and 9 seconds behind them to Sam and Adam Christie, the Brits taking fifth on the final lap. Everything was okay today. Of course, the podium is good and we've got some decent points. We're leading the championship, but Reeves and Birchall are both very close. There were no problems with the bike, but we couldn't keep up today. I was pushing 100% and Jussi was working well. Maybe tomorrow we can get a little bit more.
Yeah, it was good. You know, what can you say? We got beat fair and square, and it was a good race. I really enjoyed it, and just Ben outfoxed me today. So all credit where credit's due. He deserved the win, and we'll have to try again tomorrow, won't we? So yeah, I enjoyed it. I really enjoyed it.
It was a great fight, a great race. I made a good start, led the first lap, and then Tim was quite strong and wanted to go and push, so we followed and had a fantastic fight the whole race. And I had a bit of a plan, and somehow it just paid off. It was close between us, you know, nothing in it. So yeah, good, great to be here at Hungaroring. It's very hot conditions and difficult for us all. So we'll look forward to tomorrow now. That's going to be a bigger fight, I think.
3 points separate the top three ahead of the gold race in Hungary. Reeves and Wilkes still chasing their first victory of 2019, but 2 runner-up rankings leave them just a point behind championship leading pace. The top 3 in the sprint race finish in starting grid order, but that doesn't tell the whole story of an entertaining 9-lap battle that went right to the finish. Reigning champions Benetton Birchall bouncing back in style. Sunday opened in similarly scorching conditions, and with an earlier start time to the gold race, keeping cool was a challenge for the fans, let alone for riders, in the white heat of competition. The first sprint race of 2019 had left the top 3 positions in the series standings incredibly close, but the rest of the pack already drifting away. Most notably, Schlosser and Fries would be keen to fight their way back into contention, having finished 8 seconds behind the podium places first time out in Hungary. Yesterday wasn't so good for us. We were too slow, really. We're still learning the bike, and I hope that with the longer race we can do a bit better. I'm aiming for 3rd place. Also cut adrift of the leaders was Stroyer and Russo. 7th position in race 1, their worst finish in 11 races, and the 9 points scored leaving them still outside of the top 10 overall. Yesterday we had some electrical problems. I still don't really know for certain what the problem was, but it seemed to go a bit better in warm-up this morning. Meanwhile, for Remps and Weschelberger, the weekend had taken a turn for the worse with mechanical problems on Saturday that kept them from taking to the track. Yesterday we had a problem with an oil cooler because of the high temperatures. Not enough oil was coming through. Remps and Weschelberger rejoined the field to complete a 13-outfit lineup with 15 laps ahead of them. With a highly creditable 6th place on the board, Sattler and Neubert lined up 4th for the gold race, with the grid positions once again taken from Saturday's qualifying sessions. They will surely have been anticipating a separate fight to the lead battle, since the top 3 had pulled comfortably away over 9 laps in the sprint race. And so it proved. Riders on the front row of the grid are class apart, and separate battles forming up behind. This time it was a slow start for Sam and Adam Christie that created the classic midfield bunching. Up at the front, Reeves and Wilkes had made the faster getaway to claim the early lead. Benetton Birchall settling into 2nd, with Päivärinta and Verovainen in hot pursuit. But Reeves and Wilkes' lead was short-lived. A gear selection problem into turn 14, killing their momentum, sending them off the racing line. and behind both Birchall and Pannoniaring. The momentary issue had cost the duo 2 seconds, but most importantly, 2 positions. Quick through the final 3 turns and into the toe, Reeves and Wilkes were able to immediately strike back at the start of the second lap. As Pannoniaring and Veravainen sized up their own move for the lead, pulling out of the slipstream to hit the front, the 3 former champions went side by side into turn 1. Ben and Tom Birchall stuck on the outside and dropping from first to third. Reeves and Wilkes then completed their miraculous recovery with a straightforward inside pass on the Finns, whose race lead had lasted less than a lap. With 3 different outfits each having an opportunity to lead in the first 2 laps though, their pace was clearly relatively evenly matched and they remained closely packed together in the coming laps. 2 seconds a lap off race-leading pace, Troyer and Russo were being kept honest in the race for 6th by Sam and Adam Christie, the Brits having dropped 2 places from 5th on the opening lap and now attempting to recover. Meanwhile, despite setting their own personal best time on lap 3, Pannoniaring and Veravainen were the slowest of the lead trio and began to slip back into the path of Ben and Tom Birchall behind. Between laps 3 and 5, there were no changes of position in the race, the closest fight still for 6th, with Troyer and Russo setting an identical time to Sam and Adam Christie on lap 4 to maintain their slender advantage. The Brits' pace, though, appeared restricted whilst behind. Pulling a second a lap clear of that pair of outfits, Schlosser and Fries had their sights firmly fixed ahead on Sattler and Neubert, who themselves had gained a 2-second buffer with which to defend 4th place. Out at the back, it was a lonely race for Rutz and Bosch, who did finish, but a lap behind in 11th. And for Remps and Weschelberger, who recovered successfully from sprint race mechanical problems to get points on the board. Rutz and Bosch were the only outfit behind them though, once they were passed by Endeveld and Ramey late on. The leaders, meanwhile, had turned the second half of the gold race into their own 3-way sprint, with less than 2 seconds separating them on track and no sizable pace advantage for any one outfit, even if Ben and Tom Birchall were just over 1/10 of a second faster than their rivals on lap 6. Sam and Adam Christie continued to harry Troyer and Russo, but to no avail. Despite having been half a second quicker than the number 4 outfit in qualifying, they could find no way to execute that single lap pace with no top speed advantage to get through into clear air. Despite being less than half a second back for most of the race, they eventually faded and settled for second best, small consolation for former world champions Troyer and Russo. Both outfits were to gain an extra position though, with a mechanical problem for Sattler and Neubert from 4th. The first signs were evident when the Germans slowed at the side of the circuit on lap 6, allowing Schlosser and Fries through. And after briefly rejoining the race for another lap, they were forced to admit defeat. By the time they retired to the pit lane, they'd lost over 30 seconds and dropped down to 11th position. Gearbox problems cited as the reason for their second scoreless race of 2019. There were no such problems where the pace was still hot and the action was about to come alive at the front. Having held back patiently behind Pannoniaring and Veravainen in 3rd, conserving their tyres for a late assault, Ben and Tom Birchall decided now was the time to bolt and came soaring down the inside for 2nd, only for the Finns to respond with a well-executed cutback move. Päivärinta and Verovainen had begun to struggle for pace though, and the Birchall brothers were keen not to find themselves estranged from race leaders Reeves and Wilkes. Once the Finns had dropped to third, they slipped gradually out of contention, almost 7 seconds back, while Ben and Tom Birchall applied pressure to the race leaders. Reeves and Wilkes, though, had managed their race to perfection, and they were actually faster than the Birchalls in 3 of the last 4 laps, only easing up on the final lap to celebrate their first victory of 2019, claimed ultimately by 3.7 seconds. Plenty of mutual respect shown between the world champions who locked out both podiums in Hungary. A different order though to the gold race, which provides the 3rd winner of the 2019 campaign.
Good job. 5 minutes.
Congrats, man.
I just didn't stop pushing.
The longer race distance spread out the outfits quite dramatically, particularly in the final laps. 2 seconds, the smallest gap at the finish in the battle for 5th. It was a good start for us, but it was a long race, a hot race. We tried to push, but we didn't quite have enough pace between us. We've still taken good points, and we're not far behind the leader, so we'll aim to improve in the next race.
Pyörässä ei ollut mitään vikaa. Kyllä nyt täytyy mennä peliin eteen. Ihan hyvä kisa. Muuta podiumille ja pisteitä. Katsotaan nyt jatkossa mitä pystytään.
It was we chose to do a tactic which didn't quite work, but it was a great race, great fight. It's a great track. We tried to save the tyres a little bit, but Tim got the gap, and then in the end we were the same speed, I think. So we made a little, but then the tyre was starting to go. So the important thing is that we was in front of Pekka, and we got 2nd place and 20 points, and we go to the next round ready. You know, it's a good championship, and no, we're happy. It's been a great weekend, and let's go to Oschersleben and see what happens there.
Yeah, it was fantastic. We got a fantastic start, and I pushed really hard on the first lap, and I couldn't believe we went into the last corner, and I changed down a gear and it got stuck into 4th gear, and I thought, oh no, and I dropped back to 3rd. They came by, and then I just pushed and pushed again, and I just didn't want to let up. I knew after yesterday that Ben and Tom how fast they were, and I just pushed every lap and didn't let up, and pushed right to the very end from start to finish, and 15 laps of as fast as I could possibly go, and it paid off, and we stretched a little bit of a gap, and I still didn't. On the last lap I just kept pushing, and we've brought it home. Thanks very much to everyone who helps us, and Mark's dad Pete, he's worked hard all week, and enjoy.
Tim Reeves and Ben Birchall each take 45 points from the Pannoniaring, while a pair of 3rd places for Päivärinta and Verovainen drop the Finns to 3rd and 8 points back overall. A 15-point gap opens behind the lead trio, who would have been the podium finishers in Le Mans as well, but for the Birchalls' mechanical problems. We're less than a third of the way through the season, but the contenders in 2019 are clear-cut, the podium trio in Hungary.